There are moments in your life everything looks completely normal on the outside, but inside you know something isn't right. Not because something bad happened, but because there is a silence. A silence that makes you wonder whether you are being led or being left behind. You begin to notice small signs that others don't see. A door closes just when you thought it would open. An opportunity disappears just when you believed it was the answer to your prayer. A sense of uneasiness, even when everything looks perfect on the surface. And you wonder, is that God holding me back? Or is that just my fear? No one can answer that question for you. Not a pastor, not friends, not family. Because there are moments God does not speak to the crowd. He speaks to one person. And maybe that person is you. I remember one night I sat alone, not praying, not reading the Bible, just sitting there staring into the darkness and feeling as if God had left. No sign, no answer, no direction, only silence. And the scariest thing was not that silence. It was the thought maybe he had already spoken, but I didn't recognize it. Maybe he had closed a door and I called it failure. Maybe he had stopped me and I called it delay. Maybe he had protected me and I called it loss. That was the moment I realized the problem was not that God wasn't speaking. It was that I had not yet learned to recognize his voice. In the Bible, there was a boy named Samuel. One night when everyone was asleep, he heard a voice calling his name. Samuel. He ran to Eli thinking he had called him, but Eli said, I did not call you. Samuel went back to sleep. Then the voice called again. Samuel. 3 times like that. 3 times Samuel did not recognize that it was God, not because God was not speaking clearly, but because Samuel had never heard his voice before. And maybe that is exactly where you are standing right now. God is speaking, not in the sound you expect, not in the way you were taught, but through interruptions, through closed doors, through feelings you cannot explain. The question is not, is God speaking to you? The question is, do you recognize him when he speaks? And if you miss those signs, you may step onto a path that he never intended for you to walk. But if you learn to recognize them, everything will change. Not because life becomes easier, but because you will no longer walk alone. And what I am about to reveal to you is not knowledge. It is something I had to learn in the seasons when I thought God was the most silent. And when you understand this, you will begin to see the signs that you once missed. There is a difference between believing in God and truly recognizing when he is leading you. You can pray every day, you can read the Bible, you can say that you believe and still miss him. Not because you are not faithful, but because his voice does not sound like you expect. There was a season in my life I thought I was on the right path. Everything seemed logical. Doors opened easily. People supported me. There were no obvious obstacles, and I believed that was a sign from God. Because that's what we are taught, right? If everything flows smoothly, it's God. If everything is difficult, it's not him. But there was something inside me that was not at peace. Not fear, not doubt, just a heaviness, a silence that I could not explain. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, this is just emotion. This is just anxiety. This is just weakness. Because I didn't want to believe that maybe I was wrong. Have you ever been there? In the middle of a decision where everything outside says, keep going, but inside you something whispers, stop. No one else hears it, only you. And that makes you feel alone. I kept walking. Not because I was sure, but because I was afraid to stop. Afraid to face the possibility that I had not truly heard God. And then, little by little, everything began to fall apart. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way, but slowly. The doors that once opened began to close. The people who were once there began to leave. The clarity I once had began to turn into fog. And I remember asking God a question that I had never dared to ask before. Were you ever here? Not because I lost faith, but because I did not understand. I did not understand why He allowed me to walk so far if it was not the right path. I did not understand why He did not stop me more clearly. I did not understand why He was silent. And in that silence, I began to realize something I had never understood before. God does not always stop you by closing a door. Sometimes He lets you walk through, not to abandon you, but to teach you how to recognize His voice. I began to look back, not to find fault, but to find signs. And I realized He was never silent. It was I who had not been listening the right way. The uneasiness I felt, that was Him. The heaviness I could not explain, that was Him. The hesitation I tried to ignore, that was Him. But I had been taught that God's voice always comes like confidence. So I did not recognize Him when He came like fragile peace. In 1 Kings 19, the prophet Elijah stood on the mountain waiting for God. There was a strong wind that tore the rocks apart, but God was not in the wind. There was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. There was a fire, but God was not in the fire. Then there was a gentle whisper, and that was where God was, not in what was loud, but in what was easy to miss. I was searching for God in obvious signs, but He was speaking in subtlety. You see, sometimes the sign from God is not something that appears, but something that disappears, a peace that leaves, a clarity that fades, a conviction that is no longer there. And you try to hold on to it. You try to convince yourself that everything is still fine. But deep inside you know something has changed. That is not weakness. That is discernment. That is the way God protects you before you see the danger. The hardest thing to accept is that sometimes you do not recognize God's signs until you look back. You look back at the moments you called failure and realize it was protection. You look back at the closed doors and realize it was mercy. You look back at the delays and realize it was guidance. Not every open door comes from God, and not every closed door is against you. Some doors close because He knows what is waiting for you on the other side. Even when you do not know, even when you do not understand, even when you are in pain, maybe you are in a season like that right now. A season where everything feels unclear. A season where you do not know where to go next. A season where you wonder whether God is still leading you. I want you to know this. If you are still seeking Him, He has never stopped speaking. The problem is not that He is silent. The problem is you are learning a new language, the language of discernment, the language of spiritual perception, the language of signs that only those who slow down enough can see. And in that season, when I thought I had lost my direction, God began to teach me not through answers, but through a story. A story about a man who also missed the signs until everything fell apart. And in the middle of that ruin, he finally saw the hand of God. There was a man I once knew. He was not a pastor, not a theologian, not someone you would look at and think he is chosen by God. He was just an ordinary man. A man who prayed but did not always hear answers. A man who believed but sometimes still doubted. A man like you and like me. His name was Daniel, not his real name, but that is what I will call him. Daniel was not an unbeliever. He had believed in God since he was young. He knew the Bible. He prayed before going to sleep. He believed that God had a plan for his life. But there was one thing he had never truly understood: how to recognize when God was speaking. So when the opportunity came, he did not ask God whether it was him. He only asked whether it made sense. Everything began when he received an offer. It was the job he had prayed for. Higher salary, a new city, a new life. Everything seemed perfect. He told me, "This has to be God. Why would he open this door if he didn't want me to walk through it?" That is a question many of us have asked, and it sounds right. But not every open door is a sign to enter. Some doors open to test whether you have discernment. I remember the day he left. There was no clear sign that it was a mistake. No voice from heaven, no dream warning him, just one small moment that he almost missed. The night before he left, he said he could not sleep, not because of anxiety, but because of a strange feeling as if something was unfinished. He tried to pray, but no words came, only silence. And he decided that the silence meant approval. He did not know that sometimes silence is not approval. Sometimes it is an invitation to pause. The first few months, everything went well. He was successful. He was respected. He felt he had made the right decision. But then small things began to change. Not on the outside, but on the inside. He said he began to feel farther from God, not because he stopped believing, but because he no longer felt his presence like before. His prayers felt empty. The Bible felt like words, not life. He wondered if it was just a dry season, or if he had stepped into a place he was never led to. One night he called me, not to talk about work, not to talk about life, just to ask one question. "Have you ever felt like you missed God?" I did not answer right away, because I knew that was not a theological question. It was the question of a heart that had lost its direction. He continued, "Nothing is wrong, everything is fine, but I don't feel him anymore." That is what many people do not understand. You can be in the right place by the world's standards and still be in the wrong place by God's standards. Months passed. The uneasiness he felt did not disappear. It became stronger. Not like fear, but like a constant whisper. He tried to ignore it, because he did not want to believe he was wrong. Because going back would mean admitting that he had not discerned correctly, and no one wants to face that, until everything began to fall apart. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The things he believed were stable began to shake. The things he believed were certain began to disappear, not like punishment, but like dismantling. One day, he was laid off. No warning, no preparation. Just the end. He told me that moment did not feel like failure. It felt like awakening. For the first time in months, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not certainty, but presence. He said, "It's strange. I lost everything, but for the first time I feel like God is near." You see, sometimes God does not speak to you by adding to your life. Sometimes he speaks by taking away, not to destroy you, but to bring you back to where you can hear him clearly. Daniel returned to his old city. Not because he had a plan, but because he was no longer pretending that he knew the way. He began doing the things he had stopped doing, sitting in silence, not asking for answers, just listening. And in that silence, he began to recognize the signs he had missed, the uneasiness he had ignored, the silence he had misunderstood, the peace that had left which he had tried to hold on to. God had spoken, not in the voice he expected, but through discernment. In Proverbs 3:6, it is written, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." Not just some ways, all your ways. Even the ways you think you understand, even the decisions you think you made correctly. God does not guide you by forcing you. He guides you by teaching you to recognize him. Daniel told me something I will never forget. He said, I thought discernment meant knowing where to go." He paused, then continued, "But now I know discernment means knowing when God is not there. That is what most people do not understand. Discernment does not always say, move forward. Sometimes it says, do not go. Sometimes it says, wait. Sometimes it says, turn back. And maybe you are in a place like that right now. A place where everything looks right, but does not feel right. A place where you are not sure whether you are being led or leading yourself. A place where you do not know whether the silence is absence or a sign. The question is not whether God is speaking to you. The question is, are you willing to recognize him even if it means changing direction? Because what Daniel discovered was not only that he had gone the wrong way, but that God had been there even when he did not recognize it. And that led to the deepest revelation, not about how to recognize God's signs when everything is easy, but how to recognize him when everything falls apart. There is something no one tells you when you begin walking with God. He does not always lead you with clarity. Sometimes he leads you with the disappearance of it. You do not realize it in the moment. You only feel a shift. A peace that used to be there is no longer there. A certainty that once carried you begins to withdraw. A light that once guided you grows dim, and your first reaction is not to listen, but to try to hold on to what is leaving. You try to pray more, try to convince yourself more, try to believe that everything is still fine, but deep inside you know something has changed, not because God has left, but because he is leading you in a different way. Daniel lost his job, he lost his stability, he lost the direction he believed was his future. But there was one thing he did not lose. He did not lose the presence. He told me that in the days after everything fell apart, he began to feel a peace he could not explain. Not the peace of knowing what would happen next, but the peace of knowing he no longer had to pretend he was in control. You see, discernment does not only work when you are choosing between two paths. It works when God begins to dismantle the path you chose without him, not to punish you, but to rescue you. In John 15:2, Jesus said, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit he prunes, that it may bear more fruit." Most people think being pruned means you did something wrong, but that is not the truth. Being pruned means you are chosen, because God does not prune what does not belong to him. He only prunes what he is preparing to use. Daniel thought he had lost direction, but in reality, God was removing the noise that had kept him from hearing him. There was a moment he said he would never forget. He was walking alone. No plan, no answers, no certainty about the future, only the present. And for the first time in a long while, he did not ask God for anything. He did not ask, "What should I do?" He simply asked, "Where are you?" And in that question, he began to understand. Discernment is not the ability to predict the future. It is the ability to recognize presence. Because when you recognize the presence of God, you do not need to know everything else. You may think that God's signs must be something obvious, an open door, a specific answer, an unmistakable confirmation. But in most cases, God's sign is a shift in your soul, a peace you cannot manufacture, an uneasiness you cannot ignore, a gentle pull you cannot explain. In Colossians 3:15, it is written, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." The word rule in the original language means to act as an umpire, like a referee deciding what is valid and what is not. The peace of God is not just a feeling, it is a signal. When it is there, you can move forward. When it leaves, you must pay attention. Not because you did something wrong, but because he is leading you in a different way. Daniel began to look back at everything, not with regret, but with clarity. He realized the sign was not the collapse. The sign was the moments before it that he had missed. The uneasiness before he left. the silence in his prayers, the peace that had departed before everything fell apart. God had spoken, not by stopping him, but by giving him discernment that he chose not to trust. This is the revelation most people never learn. God does not always stop you from the wrong path. Sometimes he allows you to walk on it, to teach you how to recognize him, not to make you lost, but to make you mature. Because discernment is not born in comfort, it is born in dependence. In John 10:27, Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me." He did not say his sheep would never be confused. He said they would learn to recognize his voice. It is a process that sometimes includes going the wrong way, so you can learn to recognize when he is calling you back. Daniel did not become a different person after that. He was still himself. But one thing had changed. He no longer looked for outward signs first. He began to listen for inward signs, not emotion, not fear, but presence. He learned to stop when the peace left. He learned to wait when clarity had not yet come. He learned to trust even when he did not understand. And maybe this is where you are right now. Not at the beginning of the road, not at the end, but in the middle. A place where you do not know where to go next. A place where you are waiting for a sign. I want you to understand this. The sign is not always something new that appears. Sometimes the sign is something old that disappears. A peace that leaves, a door that closes, a direction that no longer feels right. That is not punishment. That is guidance. God does not lead you like a map. He leads you like a shepherd. A shepherd does not hand the sheep a detailed plan. He walks, and the sheep learn to recognize his voice, not because they understand the path, but because they know the one leading them. And when you learn to recognize that voice, you do not need to fear the road ahead. Even when you cannot see it, there is a question you may have been avoiding. Not because you do not know the answer, but because you know the answer could change everything. That question is, are you truly being led by God, or are you leading yourself? No one else can answer that for you. Not a pastor, not this video, not anyone. Because discernment is not something you borrow from someone else. It is something that is born when you are honest with your own soul. There are signs you have already felt. You remember them. The moment you felt the peace leave, but you kept walking. The moment you felt hesitation, but you called it fear and ignored it. The moment you knew, but you did not want to know. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. We are not afraid of going the wrong way. We are afraid of turning back. I remember a moment I knew. No one told me. There was no outward sign, but inside I knew. The peace was no longer there, and I stood before a choice. Keep going and pretend everything was fine, or stop and trust that that peace mattered more than my plan. I wish I could say that I stopped immediately, but I did not. I kept going, not because I did not hear God, but because I did not want what he was saying to be true. You see, sometimes the hardest part of discernment is not hearing God. It is accepting what you have heard. There are people watching this video, and you are in that very moment. You are standing between two paths. One path familiar, one path uncertain. One path gives you control. One path requires trust. And discernment is whispering to you, not shouting, not forcing you, just whispering. That is how God often speaks, not to control you, but to invite you to choose him. In Deuteronomy 30:19, the Lord says, "I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing, therefore choose life." He does not force you to choose life. He invites you. Discernment is how you recognize that invitation, not by logic, but by presence. Maybe you are in a relationship where the peace has left, but you stay because you are afraid to start over. Maybe you are walking on a path that your soul knows is not yours, but you keep going because you have gone too far to turn back. Maybe you are holding a door open that God has quietly closed, not because you do not love God, but because you have not yet learned to trust the discernment He placed inside you. God does not only speak to you through miracles, He speaks to you through peace, and He also speaks to you through its absence. Peace is not just a reward for obedience, it is guidance. When it is there, you can move forward. When it leaves, you must pay attention, not because you are being punished, but because you are being led. There is a reason God does not always give you the full picture, because if He did, you would walk by sight, not by faith. Discernment forces you to walk close to Him, not ahead of Him, not behind Him, but with Him. Step by step. I do not know what decision you are facing right now, but I know this. If you are feeling that gentle pull, that whisper, that shift, it is not random. God does not shout to compete with the noise of the world. He whispers so those who truly want to hear will listen. And here is the truth you need to hear. You are not lost, even if you have gone the wrong way, even if you have missed the signs, even if it has taken longer than you thought. God is not limited by your mistakes. Discernment does not only help you avoid mistakes, it helps you find your way back. A shepherd does not abandon a sheep because it went the wrong way. He goes after it, not to punish it, but to bring it back to where it belongs. In Isaiah 30:21, it is written, "Your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.'" Not in front of you, behind you. Because sometimes you only recognize His voice after you have already begun to walk. The question is not whether God is speaking to you. The question is, are you willing to stop long enough to hear Him? Because the moment you do, everything will begin to change. Not on the outside first, but on the inside. And that is where all true guidance begins. Right now, you are not here by accident. You are not hearing these words by coincidence, because something inside you recognized it, not by logic, but by confirmation. Maybe you cannot explain it, but you feel it, as if a part of you is finally being named. The part of you that has known for a long time but never had the words to describe it. The part of you that felt the peace leave and did not know why. The part of you that stood before doors, unsure whether to step through or turn back. I want you to know this. You are not weak because you need discernment. You are chosen to learn it. There is a reason God did not create you like a machine simply following instructions. He created you like a child who can recognize the voice of his Father. In John 10:4 it is written, "The sheep follow him, for they know his voice." Not because the sheep understand everything, but because they recognize him. Discernment is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming familiar with his presence. Maybe you went the wrong way. Maybe you missed the signs. Maybe you stayed when you should have left, or you left when you should have stayed. But here is what the enemy does not want you to know. You are not disqualified. You are still being led, even now, even here, even after everything. In Romans 8:28 it is written, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God." Not some things, all things, even the mistakes, even the wandering seasons, even the decisions you wish you could change. God does not waste them. He uses them to teach you how to recognize him more clearly. I want you to do this right now. You do not need to say it out loud. Just in your heart, pause and listen. Not to the world, not to fear, not to your thoughts. Just listen, because the voice you are searching for never left. It is only waiting for you to become still enough to recognize it. Pray with me. Father, I do not come to you because I understand everything. I come to you because I need you. There were moments I did not recognize you. There were paths I walked without asking you. There were signs I missed because I was afraid to stop. But today, I am not asking you for the whole map. I am only asking you for discernment. Give me a heart that recognizes when you speak. Give me the courage to stop when you say stop. Give me the trust to move when you say move. And give me peace even when I do not know the road ahead. I believe you are still leading me, even now, even here. In Jesus' name, Amen. If you felt something while hearing this prayer, that is not random emotion, that is confirmation. That is your soul recognizing the one who has always been leading you. And I want you to do one thing, not for me, but for yourself. Write in the comments, Lord, help me recognize your voice, not as a ritual, but as a declaration, a moment when you choose to listen instead of just moving. And if this video helped you see something you have never seen before, subscribe to the channel. Not because of the algorithm, but because you are creating a place you can return to when you need to be reminded of his voice. Because there will be seasons when everything becomes loud. And you will need to come back to remember how to listen. Share this video with someone you know is searching for a sign. You may not know their story, but God does. And sometimes he uses you as a sign in their life. Remember this, God does not only guide you with light in front of you, he guides you with presence within you, and when you learn to recognize him, you will no longer fear the road ahead, because you will know you never walk alone.